and welcome to Appalachian Traditions, a virtual discussion of traditional Appalachian craft, music, and dance. I'm Darcy Holdorf, the program director here at the John C. Campbell Folk School, and I'd like to thank everyone for joining us. As you can see, we have a broom maker with us today, Marlow Gates. And this webinar series is funded by a grant that's brought a lot of new programming to the folk school, including a mentorship program in traditional Appalachian craft, music, and dance that will begin next week. So we actually will have 3 students in 3 studios on campus for a month of focused study, and this is all a grant funded program. So session 1 will feature music and dance, weaving, and basketry. So you can visit our blog if you'd like to read more about that and some of the other grant-funded programs. And for those of you who can't be here on campus, we're offering a series of virtual demonstrations so that you can learn from those instructors and you can see what's going on in our studios. So we'll also share a link to that, and we'll be sending these links out in a follow-up email as well as a recording to this video. So don't worry if you can't copy those links now, we'll be sending them to you later. We've also been hosting a series of morning workshops here on campus in a handful of subjects such as cooking, gardening, and nature studies, and other classes that use the materials from our garden. And actually, Marlow will be joining us for 2 workshops, and he might mention those. He'll be doing a few broom making workshops. So these are limited to 6 students, and they're all held outdoors or in our open air venues. And we've had an excellent experience and great feedback from students and instructors for this creative new way of holding some small workshops. And we're also offering virtual demonstrations associated with those workshops. They cost $10, and you can join via Zoom, and Marlow will be doing a demonstration on how to make a witch's broom. So we'll share a link to that if you like this program and you'd like to come back and hear more from Marlow. So before we turn it over to learn about brooms, just a quick note, if it's your first time joining us, there are 3 ways to communicate with us. The chat function is a way for everyone to interact. So go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us where you're joining from and say hello. You can feel free to post questions in there, and we'll be sharing links. And then you should see also at the bottom that you have a hand icon that you can raise your hand. If we don't have a lot of questions at the end, we might have time for someone to raise their hand. We can actually open your audio and let you ask a question. And then the Q&A is probably the best place for you to ask questions. You can ask questions for Marlow, you can ask questions about the folk school. So that's a great place in the Q&A. So today's webinar will feature Marlow Gates. He's a longtime folk school instructor and a celebrated broom maker. I found out today his first class was actually in 1998. So he's been coming to the folk school for a long time. I'd like to thank him for taking the time to connect with us. He's very busy demonstrating full-time at the Biltmore and also making his own work. So we appreciate him taking the time to get connected. And he does live in Big Sandy Mush, North Carolina, which is pretty rural. And so he's worked to make this connection happen. So I appreciate that. And Marlow is a 2nd-generation broom maker, carrying on his father's tradition of craftsmanship. Rumor has it he's been tying brooms since he was 5, and I think he'll share some of those stories. He has a degree in design from North Carolina State University, and now he works with his wife, Diana, in creating brooms as functional art in their studio in Big Sandy Mush. So welcome, Marlow. And I had to ask you to turn your mic back on. So Diana, you might need to turn the mic back on for him. And I see a lot of people are joining from Florida, from California, from Georgia. So welcome, everyone.
You can get rid of that link there as well.
There you go.
All right, can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right, welcome, everyone. This is my studio here in Big Sandy Mush, North Carolina. Of course, I'm Marlow Gates. I'm going to show you guys a little about broom making and what I do to make my brooms and the materials and the tools I use when I make them. Let's start with the basics here. So the material I use to make my brooms is called broom corn. That's probably the question I get asked the most is, what do you make that out of? Broom corn is actually a variety of sorghum. Here is some from the folk school garden. Last year we harvested, and it's a little piece that was grown by Farmer Teddy, and I saved it to show you guys with the seeds on there. It's a variety of sorghum vulgare, actually. You scrape the seeds off after you're done and after harvest, And when you're finished, you'll have a piece that looks like this once you shuck it and get down before the first knuckle there, the little knurl. So this is some really beautiful broom corn. It's got some gorgeous seeds to it. The only problem is the longer you get it go to maturity, the tougher it is. So most broom corn is actually harvested before the seeds fully mature, and that gets it a little more supple, a little easier to work with. So this is commercial broom corn. I grow a little bit in my garden as well, and I grow some at Biltmore, but I get maybe 20 pounds if I'm lucky and the weather cooperates. I use literally a ton a year, 2,000 pounds. So there's a big difference between what I grow and what I need commercially. So when the broom corn, when I'm ready to work with it, I soak it in water to make it pliable so I can do the weaving on the top of the brooms. I'll show you some of the brooms I'm going to be working on, some of the different types I make. First of all, we have a little broom like this one here. This is a hearth broom for the fireplace. It's just a one-handed broom. It's light enough to use the one hand, get deep into the fireplace and sweep out the ashes. It also makes a good little broom for cleaning up, dusting, and putting things into the dustpan as well. It's probably a nice practical size, not too heavy. I have a lot of kids who like to use those as well. The everyday kind of broom most people are familiar with, of course, is a sweeping broom. Here is a good small sweeper. It has a beautiful spiral to the handle, and this one, we'll go out in the woods and find all our handles in the winter months. And this is a beautiful example of where a honeysuckle vine wrapped around this piece of wood to make that twist in the wood. But this is just a good, perfect size for using with two-hand, and I make taller ones for taller folks. This just happens to be one of my small sweepers here, and of course it has a little fancy, so I call it a small fancy sweeper. The other kind of brooms, let me set this over here out of the way. I have, it's probably my more practical as well, but this one is a cobweb broom. This one is a little funny. It's light and long. I love the twisted handle on this. This is a piece of corkscrew willow that had a great little twisting to the wood naturally, and I thought it would make kind of a little crooked broom, almost like a little wand or something. But these are designed for getting way up in the corners and getting down spider webs. When we scrape off the seeds off the broom corn, it leaves behind these little hooks, and these hooks act like natural Velcro. They really catch the spider webs and the fine dust, and they work really well. And so a natural bristle broom tends to be one of the best brooms you can use, and the best ones for getting down, spider webs, cleaning underneath the couches, and also just general sweeping of the floor. So I do make some very practical brooms, but I also make some beautiful ones. Sometimes I make brooms as art, and sometimes I even use dyed broom corn. So this is a fun little broom. This is my witch's broom, and this is actually what I'm going to be teaching in a little workshop on October 2nd. There at the folk school, so I'm excited to come back and teach, even if it is outdoors and socially distanced. We're going to make it work. And this is the broom corn. It's got this beautiful color. Unfortunately, the dye is very strong, and so when I work with it, I have to wear I have to be sure to wear old clothes, because otherwise it looks like blue dye and purple dye everywhere. It's kind of like I don't know. It's like I call it a Smurf massacre when I get done. It's blue everywhere. But this is a great handle that has a piece of bittersweet vine, and I carved the bark off of this one to show the color underneath. And I found this one actually on Biltmore Estate. But again, I go in the winter months because, well, the leaves are down in the winter. The sap is drained low in the woods, and so the wood's a little drier in the winter. But probably most important, the reason I go in the wintertime is there's no snakes or poison ivy or mosquitoes or ticks or bears or spiders or anything else that's going to eat me alive out there. So I go in the wintertime. I cut down green saplings mostly. I get some fallen wood and some driftwood, but mostly I cut green, and I have to put it under shelter and let it cure for about a year before I can work with it. So I have to let the wood slowly dry. And as the wood dries slow, it's less likely to crack, but also it loses about 10% of the diameter. So it shrinks about 10 to 15%, and it also lightens up and strengthens up. So it's much lighter and stronger when we let the wood cure out like that. So this is going to be a fun little one, and that's what we're going to work on our class on the 2nd, and also it's going to be part of my little web series of virtual demonstrations. I'm going to demonstrate how to tie one of those for you guys later on. All right, put that aside. So handles that I use, the one I just showed you was a piece of bittersweet vine, and this is what a bittersweet vine looks like in the raw. When I harvest it, it's twisted around each other. And when a vine and tree or two vines wrap around each other, It's a natural formation. It's called a thigmotropism, or a thigmotropic piece of wood. Basically, it means grown around one another. And the longer the tree and the vine grow together, the bigger the spiral. And sometimes the tree wins, sometimes the vine wins. But like I say, the longer they grow, the better. This one, of course, was two bittersweet vines wrapped around each other. And what I'll do is probably take a little hooked knife, and I'm going to peel some of the bark off to show the color underneath. And so what I do is I tell people I carve the broom handles, but really all I'm doing is peeling it. Much like you peel a potato, I just take a little section of the knife, with a knife, a hooked knife here, and just take a little section of the bark off. What I want to do is get down and see what's underneath that layer. Sometimes there's a larger cambium layer right underneath the wood, and that usually has a different color. And then you can get down to the inner cambium layer, and then the wood in the center as well. So usually you can get more colors out of a piece by carving it and showing off what's underneath. And it gives a nice little, I guess, a contrast to the wood. So on this particular one, I'll probably leave the bark on one side and then carve it off completely on the other side. When I'm done with it, it will look similar to this little piece right here. So this is a bittersweet vine I carved up earlier. It was really kind of neat because it had a little branching where it came off the piece. You can see where the piece started to grow. And then it grew back around the other part of the broom handle here. And so we've carved the bark off there. I've left it on the other section. This one is pretty much ready to be sanded. And so I will hand sand these guys. I come in with a little bit of sandpaper. And I like a nice cloth back sandpaper because it's very flexible. Clean Spore makes a great sandpaper. And I'll just come in and lightly sand it and try to see if there's any rough spots. I also have a larger sanding wheel with a little, like a drum sander, but it's a little wheel sander, and a little flap wheel. And I use all three of those to help get the broom, smooth as possible before I start to put the finish on. So there's a lot of carving, there's a lot of sanding, and this particular piece right here is a good example of this is maple, and this one is one that has the bark. I've already carved this one, and he's ready to be sanded. This is going to be a little Hearth Broom. This one is nice and straight there. This will be a beautiful sweeper broom when I'm done with it. But again, I was talking about the different layers underneath there. So what I'm going to do is explore and see what's underneath this bark. Now let's get down here and see. We're just going to take a little section and look. Now this one has still a little green, but it's got a beautiful light wood underneath. This maple is going to be gorgeous. Now, the layer that's green right now will actually fade to a brown, just like when you cut an apple and it looks nice and edible when you first cut it. If you leave it sitting out for a few hours, it'll turn brown. It's the same thing with this bark. As the oxygen hits that intercambium layer, it's going to oxidize and turn brown on us. So it doesn't matter if I go ahead and peel a little bit now. It's actually much easier to peel the bark when it's green like this. It is literally just like peeling a potato when it's nice and green. But I run the risk, if I cut too much bark off, I run the risk of it drying out too quickly. And losing too much moisture too fast means that it puts stresses on the wood, and the wood is more likely to crack. And I don't want this piece to crack. So I'm not going to carve much more on this one right now. But what I can do is carve it all, leave the part I want, and then put a coat of finish on it to slow down the drying. And there's ways around it. If you want to really use a piece while it's green, you can. But I usually like to let this one dry a little longer. So I'm going to put this one aside. We'll let him dry, and we'll get to the actual making of the broom. So the woodworking part starts with cutting the pieces to size. So this one, let me pull this back out again, is just one that's straight from the woods. It has not been trimmed. When I'm ready to trim him, I'll take him to the bandsaw, and I'll cut an angled top usually, and we'll cut off any nubs that are sticking out. And then once it's trimmed better and I've carved where I want the bark off, that's when I'll go to the mechanical sander and work on sanding all the saw marks off. Then it'll come up for a hand sanding one final time before I put a coat of finish on. I use a clear furniture lacquer for my finish. A lot of my brooms, the handle is probably the most important part because that's the part you interact with. That's the part you touch. And I want to make sure that part is smooth. So I spend a lot of time sanding and finishing the handle. More than any other part of the broom, I'm probably more of a woodworker than I am a broom maker because I spend so much time getting those handles just perfect. That's where my dad really loved the wood part. He loved to get out and find the wood. My father, Ralph Gates, he was a master broom maker as well. And he wasn't always a broom maker to begin with, though. My father actually worked for NASA. He was lead engineer for Grumman Aerospace. He helped design the LIM, the lunar module that stayed up on the moon. And he loved his job, but he was working 80-hour weeks around launch times, and he hardly got to see his kids. And so in 1972, well, actually 73, after the last Apollo mission launched in 72, my father got a call from my cousin, his niece, and she was working for a potter in Gatlinburg. And one of the local Gatlinburg artists, Mr. Lee Ogle, turned out had a heart attack. He was known for his broom making, so he was willing to take an apprentice to help him out for the summer. And my dad heard of that opportunity, flew up and met Mr. Ogle, tried his hand at broom making, absolutely loved it, fell in love with these beautiful mountains we live in, and came back home to Florida. 2 weeks later, had a U-Haul loaded up, the entire family ready to go, tendered his official resignation, and my father literally went from a rocket scientist to a broom maker's apprentice. We've done it ever since in our family. So I tell people, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to do this, but it sure didn't hurt in our family. Let me get ready to start here. We're going to need just a couple things. One, the broom corn. That's probably the most important. And, of course, a broom handle. This broom corn I've soaked in hot water to make it good and flexible. So we're going to move a few things off here and get ready. Put my broom corn up here. I've got a handle here as well we're going to use. The handle today is another one. This is actually another piece of maple. That's that same one I was carving on that was too green. Well, this one wasn't. I carved it, sanded it, and put a coat of finish on. So I've got one coat of finish. By the time it's done, though, I'll have 4 or 5 more coats, and it'll be nice and smooth by the time it's all finished. What I need to do now is get my tying wheel, and I'm going to use it for just as a brace to put a nail in here. So I need to put a nail to give me an anchoring point. There's no glue or other nails holding together, but I have to start the string somewhere, and that nail just gives me a starting point. Back in the day, the shakers were often they would drill a hole and either leave the hole or put a wooden peg through there and then tie the broom onto that peg. But by putting a nail, it gives me a little protrusion, someplace I can really anchor to. And it also, it's a last-ditch effort. If the broom loosens up or something happens, at least I've got the nail there to hold it. So I come about good 4 fingers up from the bottom. I've already got a hole drilled here, so I know which way it's going to hang on the wall. I want to put the nail parallel to the hole. So the holes go straight up and down. I put it that way, and I put the nail straight up and down about 4 fingers up from the end of the broom handle. You'll notice that the handle is tapered. The point of the handle, tap this in there, the point of the handle is so that there is support deep inside the broom. This broom will be just a little larger than this one when it's finished, but the nail will be right below the little weaving, or the wraps, and the point of the handle will come all the way down to that first row of stitches. So it's important to have a tapered handle. That was a later Appalachian affectation. The folks in the Appalachian Mountains, of course, were making their brooms long after the Industrial Revolution. They were still making them by hand. And that's where my father learned from Mr. Ogle. Mr. Ogle had learned from his grandmother, who used to make brooms for the Gatlinburg Valley around the turn of the century. So by pointing the handle, they could have extra support. And it was just a handy way to make the broom a little stronger. And anything that lasted longer was, good in the eyes of the Appalachian folks. They needed everything to last as long as it could. So all I've done is I put a little loop or string and I used a little slip knot, wrapped that string right over top of the nail, and then right on top of the handle here, we're going to pull down tight. Now, there's no other nails, there's no glue, there's nothing holding this together other than pressure. So this foot wheel here allows me to pull much, much tighter than I can pull by hand. In fact, we've got to get it so tight, it's almost like a guitar string. So if you can play a tune, you can make a broom. I always tell people it's a really bad rhyme, but, that's how I can remember how tight to pull it. So I've got my string anchored, I've got my broom handle ready, I've got my broom corn. It's time to begin. We'll take our first stalk of broom corn, and right where the stalk meets the bristle is called the knurl, and that's the toughest part of the plant. I'm going to put the string right underneath, or put the knurl right underneath there, and put the string on top and pull tight so it makes a little V. We want to indent that broom corn, and this is why it has to be wet. There's just no way I could bend that and get that to indent like that if it was dry. And then we'll start the next one right beside it and just build up a layer all the way around. I've got a few pieces that are a little long on this particular broom, but that's okay. I will trim them off when I'm done. So I just happen to have the broom corn I had soaked up and ready today. pull these around. We're going to build up a layer all the way around, just side by side, barely touching, and pull tight. The main thing, of course, is to pull tight. Don't forget to pull tight. Now, if I have a really nice stalk and I like it a lot, I can save it for the outside layer. These are part of the inside layer, and they don't need to be as pretty. The outside layer, though, has to be perfect, and I have to have nice long stems, and I want to make sure they're not discolored, and thinner is a little better. It's a little easier to weave a thin stalk versus a fat stalk. So this is a good example of thin versus fat. It's not this problem. It'd still be useful. He's just not as easy to weave when he's this big around. So I'm going to put this little guy right in here and pull down tight, and he'll be an anchor piece on the inside layer. I've almost got a layer here. I got a little gap. Let's put one more in, and that'll be our inside layer on this little Hearth Broom. And let's wrap this layer nice and tight. Now we've got it in complete. We're going to wrap it about 4 or 5 times, straight up the handle, side by side, and building up a wrap. So we just pull. And as I need more string, I can let the wheel flop. This wheel is a souped up version of a log. Back in the day, a piece of kindling was used, a log, anything you had, a piece of firewood was quite common. Oftentimes people would just take a hatchet and cut a notch all the way around a piece of firewood and then wrap their twine or the string in that log and that notch there and use that to pull up tight. Now, if you're just making 1 or 2 brooms, you could literally just wrap it around your boot and let loose from there. Quite often, some people would even take a bundle of rope and throw it over a rafter and then tie a little loop in the end, step on the loop, and then pull down, and that way they could anchor their broom tight. There were hundreds of ways to make a broom, and most folks made their own broom, so there's no right or wrong way to make a broom. My father always said, as long as the fuzzy end is down and it holds together, that's a good broom. So I live by that today and tell people there's no wrong way to do it. Next thing, we've got our layer here. Now this is going to be a flat broom, and so on this one I want to add shoulders or wings to help flatten out the broom, and so that it will be, when I sew it, it'll already be in the shape I need. So the first thing we're going to do is add some shoulders here. We're going to find where the hole is, and right now the hole is going right through here. So right now the hole's straight up and down, or we'll turn it this way, the hole goes that way. So I'm going to put 2 or 3 pieces right on top of the hole, and then I'll put 2 or 3 pieces 180 degrees on the other side. Let me find some pieces here that aren't quite so large. I don't want to make it too big here. There. This is a little piece that's broken off, and that's just fine for an inside layer, inside piece. It won't hurt at all. So I try to use the ones that aren't pretty enough to weave and really put these in here. So let's get these guys in. Let's put 3 pieces here, and then let's go 180 degrees around to the other side and put another 3 pieces in on the other side. Now this one is kind of long, and it's got a section here that's a little floppy, but I really want this good stuff that's up here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go above the knurl on this case and just put that in right here, and that way it'll be about the length I want anyway. And that way I can use longer broom corn on a shorter one without having to compromise. The next one in, and here is one, last one here. And again, this one's pretty long, so I'm going to choke up on that one. Instead of putting it down here, I'm going to put it right up here. And that's okay on the inside layers, but not on the outside layer. On the outside layer, we want to make sure all the stems line up perfect. So now we're going to wrap this inside layer, these shoulders, nice and tight, about 4 or 5 wraps, just like we did with the first layer, and that'll help bind them together. And again, I'm getting it just as tight as I can. Now, you notice this string is bright green. This is a modern nylon mason's line. This is not a traditional material, but very strong. This is about 160-pound breaking strength twine, so it really can take the strength, the pulling I'm doing to it, but it's also, because it's so thin for its diameter, you can really indent the broom corn with it. A lot of old brooms around here were often made with waxed linen because flax grew very well here in the mountains, and so linen was very common. I've seen brooms made out of rawhide. Hickory bark was real common as well. In fact, that's what my father first learned to tie brooms with, was a bark tie. They would originally use hickory bark. They would soak it. They would strip it off the tree green, about 1/2 inch wide strips, keep it wet, wrap it onto the broom up, and then wrap it back down, and it would make a crisscross pattern. They called it lacing the broom because it looked like shoelaces. And but as the bark would dry, it would constrict tightly and hold the broom in place. So that was another simple way to make a broom. And that was famous. The Ogles were famous for making the bark tie like that. when Dad discovered nylon and realized he could do the old shaker weaving that we do now, he really embraced the nylon, and we've been using it ever since. So now we're going to trim off the inside layer to make room for the outside layer. So I've got my little trusty, historically accurate utility knife here. I always like to have a sharp blade no matter what, and these little knives work perfectly for what I need. I trim off the pieces at an angle because I'm making a taper. I don't want it to be 90 degrees. I want a nice long taper. I tell people we're going to make a ramp, what we're looking for. I don't want a cliff. I want a nice ramp, preferably a nice handicap accessible ramp. And that way it's nice and long, and we don't end up with a real drop in our brooms. Now these long pieces, you're like, why am I saving all these? These guys I'm going to save for later. I'm going to split them in half right down the middle, and I'll use those little half splits to make smaller brooms, the little whisk brooms, and other ones, these little whisk brooms, the cake testers, the pot scrubbing brushes. I use these guys. I put them in upside down and backwards, fold them over, and then we weave them to make these little pattern here. So I can use pretty much all of my scrap pieces. The shakers came up with that, and also came up with the idea of making multiple ones of those at one time, and that way we can separate them. But that was a very useful, a good use of their scrap material. They always believed in waste not, want not, and they lived by that, the shakers did. The shakers really innovated broom making and made brooms, started making brooms with a flat style. Traditionally, brooms were done round, like that witch's broom there, the round one we showed you earlier. That was what most of the brooms looked like. They weren't done with broom corn, though. They were done with twigs or pieces of grass, like switchgrass. Broom sage was used, Scotch broom. There was lots of different materials, whatever was handy. I've seen brooms made out of palmetto fronds. I've seen a lot of brooms just bundled with whatever material you could find. And if people didn't have, waxed linen, of course, they used for the binding, quite often they were using tobacco twine or things that were, whatever could be found around the farm. I've seen one broom was made from strips of inner tubes, cut into strips. It was back in the 20s. I guess during the maybe 20s or early 30s in the Depression, they'd taken strips of inner tubes and wrapped their broom with these little rubber strips, and it worked fine. I wouldn't call it the most pretty broom, but it works, and that's all that matters. So I've got my inside layers trimmed. They're trimmed at the angle, and they're pretty even. I've kind of got a cone, a little taper going on, and that's what I'm looking for, is a nice little taper. Now I can start my outside layer. Now this one, I want to save all these nicer pieces I've saved out. I want to put the first one in, and I want to treat it just like another layer all the way around, side by side, but I need to make sure I have an odd number. It doesn't matter what number it is. As long as it's an odd number, the pattern will work out correctly, and we'll get that little checkerboard pattern. An even number won't work for the little simple basket weave pattern, and otherwise you just go over the same one again and again. But with an odd number, you tend to go over the one that you went underneath the time before. So just a simple basket weave is what I'm shooting for today. So I definitely need an odd number. This one looked good, but he's got a broken stalk, so I'll save him for the next broom. We'll use them on the inside of the next one. And again, I'm checking to make sure they're wet. As I pick them up, I'm giving them a little squeeze at the bottom to make sure they bend without cracking on me. I'm looking for all the prettiest ones. And we're just going to build that layer all the way around and make sure I've got the nicest pieces here. Let me reach down in the pile and get a few more pieces here. Make sure we got some of the better ones here. There's always more broom corn. See if I've got, there's some nice thin ones we can use. Perfect. So I'm not going to be weaving too far with these guys, so this one here is fine. And I want to kind of get a little bit of I like them to be a little longer towards the edges so that when I make the broom, there's a little bit of math involved, actually. Maybe that's why Dad was so good at it. If you look at a broom, it really is kind of a triangular shape. Well, the inside one would be one leg of the triangle, and then the hypotenuse is what we're looking at, that edge from edge to edge. And if you put too short of a stalk, you don't have a whole lot of support down at the end when you trim it. So it's always a good idea to put a little extra long ones on the outside where those shoulders are so that they can reach all the way down to the floor, and make sure that you have a nice broom that'll sweep well edge to edge. That's kind of an advanced thing to think about, but we want to make sure we make functional art is what I shoot for. So I'm always thinking about those details. All right, we need to count and see where we are. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 will not work. We got a big gap there, so we're going to shoot for maybe 13. If that doesn't work, we'll shoot for 15. But it doesn't matter as long as it's odd. Let's get a few more pretty ones here. Here we go. We're at 10, 11, 12. This one's a pretty one. It's got a little, it's going to be hard to see from way back there, but it's got a little defect in the broom corn. It's called curly knuckle. It makes a little waving pattern right at the end here. And on a store-bought broom, you'll rarely see that because it's considered a genetic defect, and it's hard to feed through the machine real easy. So most of the time, they'll save that for the inside. You won't, they don't show that off. I think it's beautiful. So if I find a piece like that, I usually put it right on the outside to show it off. All right, I was talking and got distracted. Let's make sure I got that odd number in there. So I've got 13, and I've got a little bit of a gap, but I think I can just space that out just like that. Pull down tight. That should be our layer. Perfect. All right, let's wrap this last layer in place. I'm going to move these guys out just a little bit here because I'm going to knock them off here shortly. And then make room for this. Need to weave this thing. So broom making does require a good deal of upper body strength. You've got to be able to pull tight and to hold it. And, you know, there are ways to kind of lock it in. But you notice I'm not pulling with my hands as much as I'm pulling with my shoulders and I'm pushing with my legs. That way I can use the larger muscle groups to make the broom, and I don't have to wear my arms out. I guess most people, I would say that it's like rowing a boat. Except imagine rowing a boat all day long. That's what I do, but it's still tied to the dock when I look up. So the scenery doesn't change much, but I row all day long. So to do the weaving here, we just lift up one, and we go underneath it. And then we go over top of the next one, over and under, all the way around. And I've got to pull tight after every other one. I give it a good, nice, slow pull to help lock it in place. And I want to keep it even as I go. So I try to leave the string pretty much straight and then just hinge the broom corn up and down as I weave it. So we lift up one, go underneath, go over top of the next one. When you first start making brooms, this is really awkward. Doing the weaving can feel like you're all thumbs, but eventually you'll get a rhythm. You'll get to where you can do it, and you know, it's all muscle memory. Just like if you watch somebody who crochets or knits for a long time, they can do it without even looking. I'm not quite to that point yet. I still have to look to see what I'm doing. But I do find if I think about the process, I slow it down a little bit. So it's best if I just don't think about it and let my fingers do all the work for me. And, you know, I find it's very meditative. And I think that's one of the things my father found in broom making is broom making can be pretty stress relieving. There's something about it. It's a good little physical activity, but because it's a repeated activity and, you know, you can kind of switch off your mind, you can think about other things, and there's a certain zen to it, I think. And it makes broom makers pretty relaxed folks, I think. So I'm working on the weave. We're about 2 or 3 turns up, and it's starting to show up that pattern nicely. You can actually see what that's looking like there as we're going along. It'll take a little bit, but we'll just keep working and keep weaving this in place. Now, you got to understand, I'm a second-generation broom maker, so this was kind of a chore growing up. We were expected, my brothers and I, my older brother Martin, my brother Marshall, and I would watch them come home after school, and they were, you know, expected pretty much to finish their homework, and then we'd all help Dad in the broom shop until supper time. It was probably about 3rd grade I finally realized that not all the other kids had to go home and make brooms with their dad, and I didn't realize we were a little different until much later. So I rebelled. I didn't want to be a broom maker growing up, honestly. I figured, you know, who wants to do what their dad does? So I ran off to college. I got my degrees in industrial design and studied architecture. And right after graduation, my father tricked me. He called me up and said he needed help in the family business. I told him, fine, I'll make him a website and we'll get some brochures printed and I'll catch you up on the orders. I'll give you 1 summer. That was my deal, 1 summer. Well, I fell back in love with it. I found the joy my father found in it. I found the relaxation. I found the pride of making things with your hand. And these things weren't evident as a kid, but as an adult, I got to see what found, the joy. And that was what really turned me on to broom making. And I was stuck. I couldn't think of anything else. And also happened to be that summer, I met my beautiful wife, Diana, and she encouraged me to carry on the family tradition. So nowadays, we have 2 boys. They're the 3rd generation. Corbin's my oldest. He's 18. And Jayton, my youngest, he's 13. I tell them they're the 3rd generations, but I don't know if they even know they're doomed yet. But somebody has to carry it on. Actually, they're both really good at it. And they're both, Jayton was helping me yesterday while I was doing a demonstration, and he tied almost a dozen little cobweb brooms, so I'm super proud of them. But I don't know if they'll do it professionally, but they both know how. And so even if they don't carry on the family business, they can show their kids and they can teach somebody else, even with what they know right now. So I don't worry about the craft ever dying out. And places like the folk school, train so many folks to at least be ambassadors for these crafts and to help carry on those crafts. Even if they don't do them as a living, those crafts are still alive and well. So the weaving pattern's coming along quite nicely. We're going to wrap this one up here in just a minute. Let me get around one more time, and then we'll give this one the final wrappings. Get back to the beginning here. To finish this off, we're going to do a whip knot. So we're going to take a loop of string that I cut earlier. This is just a piece of white nylon string. I made a little loop out of it. We're going to make a whip knot, and this is going to be our tie-off string. So we put that loop right underneath the green string and pull tightly. And we're going to leave that loop underneath there as we make those wraps all the way around. And then we're going to use the loop to pull the end of the green string back underneath itself. And that's going to make a nice, secure whip knot. Whip knots were used on the sailing ships. Quite often they'd have those large manila ropes. And back then they couldn't just burn the end to fuse them together. They would use a fine waxed linen or another fine cord to do a whipping on the end, and that kept the ropes from fraying. So I've got it all tight. We've got it in place. I'll put my thumb here to keep the tension on there so I don't lose the tension. I cut the end of the string off down below, thread the end of the string through the loop, grab the other end of the loop, and then we pull. So 3, 2, 1, pull. And that snaps the string from one side to the other. It just comes right underneath there and locks it in place. And that way I don't have to have a large, bulky knot. That broom is now born. We cut the cord, and it is ready to go. So what we're going to do is pull it down tight, make sure it's tight, wrap around my knife handle, give it a good sturdy tug, and then we're going to trim off the end of the string. And now I can trim off the ends of those skins. And you can see it's wet. My hands usually get really wet. People always ask me, do you have calluses? Your hands must be really rough. And I got to explain to them that, no, broom making, at least in the way my father designed it and made the way we make our brooms today, is actually pretty smooth on the hands. The worst case scenario, I end up with dishpan hands. I'm usually pretty pruny by the end of the day. But I tell people, broom corn is actually sorghum, so it's actually got a little sugar left in it. It's kind of sweet. Imagine doing a sugar scrub all day long, and you end up with very smooth hands that way. So I have strong hands, but smooth hands. So maybe I got to figure out a way to market it as some sort of spa treatment, and that way I can charge people to make brooms and tell them it's good for their skin. Next thing we're going to do is bevel that sharp edge. I got it cut off flush there, but it's still a little rough, so I want to very carefully cut this off and make sure I do not cut the string, whatever I do. If I cut the string, I got to start over. I just want to cut that off and bevel that edge just a little bit. That is about as far as I can go today. This is still sopping wet right now, and this needs to dry for probably a couple days. Nice sunny day would be wonderful. Before I put it out to dry, though, I do have one last thing to do, and that is I lay it down at the floor and I give it a good stomping. So I stomp it flat. This is how I get rid of all my frustration. You just stomp it flat really well, and then it's flattened out just enough so when it dries, it'll be in the shape I need it to do the next operation, which is the sewing. So we got woodwork, weaving, and now it's time to do the stitching. So I'm going to set this one aside, and we're going to grab the one that I've already got dried and make a broom on that. Do that over there. This is pretty much the same thing. This is a broom I did a few days ago, and it's dried out enough to be ready to be sewn. What we're going to do is put it in the clamps and stitch it. I've got broom making is real simple tools. A lot of people have seen broom making done with a broom machine, broom machines are wonderful devices. You patented in the late 1800s. They were great for making lots of brooms at one time, but all the brooms pretty much had to be the same. They had to be a dowel handle and the perfectly straight handle to fit into the jaws of that machine. But by doing it by hand, I can go back and do more artistic brooms, things that wouldn't fit into a machine. But it may take a little longer, but it makes for a better broom, I think. Of course, it's starting to storm here in my place. I don't know if you can hear, but the rain is hitting our tin roof, and it's kind of nice here. It's one of the luxuries of working out in the country in the old general stores. We get the elements, and so we get a little bit of rain. We can hear it nicely. So we're going to put the clamps on. I just tighten this down. And these could have been made by hand. This is actually an old pair of wooden crutches. This is where the tip of the crutch would have gone on. And I recycle old crutches from the thrift store, and a lot of my students save them for me and bring them to me. And we drill them out and make spreaders out of them. So we're putting in the spreads. The rows of stitches are called spreads, and this is called the spreader. And the spreader is a perfect little tool for holding it flat. But again, you could have made this at home with a couple pieces of 1x, or even sticks would have been fine. So in the tying wheel you could have made. The only other tool that you need that you'd have to either have a blacksmith make or whittle one out of dogwood was a needle. This is the needle I use. It's called a bodkin. And a bodkin is a term for a flat needle. And the reason it's flat is because it slides well between the fibers, the broom corn. A round needle wouldn't work nearly as well as a flat needle. So we've got our bodkin. A blacksmith friend of mine made this for me, and it's perfect. It's kind of like a letter opener with a hole in one end. It's the best way to describe it. It's not sharp, but it is tapered so that it will slide nicely. So I need to get some string here. I think I knocked my string over, of course. Let me grab that here. Hang on. We're going to go. Perfect.
And Marlow, I think you might have moved your phone there. We lost your audio.
Go. I got my string. I think I bumped into the speaker on the phone there. How's that?
That's good. You got it.
Right. Perfect. So I'm going to pull off about 4 yards of string, and we're going to use that to do the sewing on this one. Let's cut that off. That's what happens when I lose string. We lose audio, too. Set that right there so I don't have to go hunting it again. And then we're going to double up our string, and we're going to make a self-locking knot. So what we do is we go and double it up, find the center. We're going to make what's called a lark's head knot. It's a real simple knot. We're going to fold it over, and we make Mickey Mouse ears out of it like this, and then we fold those Mickey Mouse ears together. And that makes a little lock knot that'll fold it onto itself. And some people call it a lark's head, and it works perfectly for locking down. There are other methods to sewing, and some people will start by just pushing the needle through and pulling the string through and then wrapping the string and then only sewing with one string. I like this method because it locks together and holds it while you sew it, and you don't have to keep the tension on there anymore. So let's get both strings through there and then pull it down tight. Back and forth. So we're about half an inch or so from one end or the other. Let's come back over on this side here, right there. That'll work perfectly. So we're going to thread up our needle, get our needle ready to go, and then we're going to start stitching this one. We want to stitch it and make sure it's nice and tight. So I'm going to do just a little bit of stitching here, and then we'll show you what it looks like, and then we'll get into maybe some questions and answers. So we go through the broom. I'm going to jump over the string. The first stitch just pulled that knot down snug. Now I'm going to jump over the string, the other side, and then go straight back through, and we're going to come out in the same hole, except on the lower side of the broom, the bottom end, and then pull, and that's going to create our first stitch right there. And then we're going to jump, flip the broom over, go to the other side, come back over, and then this time I'm going to angle about a thumb width over. So I'm about a thumb width further than I was. Pull that through. So now I've got 2 stitches, and I'm lined up for the third stitch, and this stitch will be about a thumb width over. So this time I can go straight through the broom and be a thumb width over on that side. And we'll just work our way across, doing these little stitches all the way across the broom. And then on this particular broom, I'm going to come back and stitch in between each one of these thumb widths to make it even tighter. So let me show you a finished one here. Over on the edge over here where I've got some brooms leaning up, you'll see my cropper. This tool is basically, it's a silage cutter, but it works well as a broom cutter. And it just comes down with a curved blade like an old paper cutter and just cuts it right off at the end. But when I get done, I'll have 2 rows of stitches. It'll look about like a little larger version of that when I'm finished. And so the bottom row will have much tighter stitches in it. The bottom row holds the broom out flat. The top row holds the broom tight to that pointed handle that's deep inside there. So you always have to have a broom with at least 2 rows of stitches. Never buy a broom with just 1 row unless it's a whisk broom. But if it has a wooden handle, it needs at least 2 rows of stitches to give it good support. Preferably 3 rows, and if it's really big, do it for 4 rows. The Shakers used to say that the more rows, the better. And because they were so thrifty, people would buy like the 5-row brooms. When the broom wore down, they would cut the bottom row out and make it a little more flexible. So you could get lots of use out of the broom as you wore it down just by trimming more of the rows out. So when I'm finished, when I'm at work and I don't have my cropper handy, to give it a trim, I just break out the little scissors here. So pretend this is all done. We're going to bundle it together and we'll give it a haircut here. So we just take our little shears and give it a trim across. We'll do this once. Let's see, make sure I'm even here. I'm not going to make it as a barber. I'll tell you that right away. I am no hairstylist, but I do okay as making flat tops. So that's about the only cut I can do. So trim this off all the way around. And that is ready to go. When I finish the stitches, I'll take it off, and that's when I normally do the trim is after I finish, but I wanted to show you the trimming today. And then I can take my brand new broom and clean up my mess when I'm done. So that's the basics: woodworking, weaving, and then the sewing at the bottom. Then we gave it a haircut. Then I'll come back and sand it smooth on the handle. I'll put another 4 or 5 coats of finish, and I'll sand in between each coat where it's nice and smooth, and just as smooth as glass when I get done with it. That is the basics of making a broom. I hope you guys enjoyed all the work that goes into it. It's a lot of fun, and I don't get bored, because when I want to do a different operation, or if I get tired of doing the weaving and my shoulders get a little sore, then maybe it's time to whittle on the handles late at night, or I can always do some sewing at the bottom. So there's always something to be done in broom making. There's no excuse for being too idle. But as I was talking about broom being a stress reliever, you know, I secretly think that maybe broom making is actually for maniacal people who might become serial killers, because honestly, the first thing I do to the poor thing is I drown the broom corn, then I strangle it, and then I stab it again and again and again, and then I chop its head off. So, I mean, if you have any maniacal tendencies, become a broom maker. It relieves the stress and makes it much easier on yourself. All right, guys, thank you so very much. Let's see what kind of questions we might have.
Thank you, Marlow. That was great. You know, I've seen you demonstrate a few times, and I learn something new every time. So,
because I make it up differently every time. You never know what's going to come out of my mouth.
So I encourage everyone to look at Marlow's website. Diana redid their website recently. It's got a lot of great videos, and the design is really nice. So we did share that in the chat. And I see some people are starting to ask questions. So now's a good time to send questions in for Marlow. And I'll start with, you've got a few questions about growing broom corn. So Tammy Elwell says that last week she harvested some of the broom corn that she planted earlier this spring, her first planting, which was very exciting, but she noticed there were a few saddleback caterpillars eating the leaves. She wonders what garden pests, what garden pests have you noticed in your broom corn, and what do you do to prevent them?
So broom corn is actually the saddleback caterpillars are the worst. And just because, not that they're going to hurt anything, they're just going to eat the leaves. They don't bother the broom head at all. But, you know, of course, if you happen to run across a saddleback caterpillar and touch it, you'll know exactly what I mean. I had some broom corn growing at Biltmore, and I had a very curious guest who decided to see what that bug was there, and plucked up one of our saddleback caterpillars and got a nasty sting. But that was our excitement for the day. Other than that, the saddleback caterpillars and a few things that'll eat the leaves. The only other things you'll find is aphids. Sometimes, especially if it's really wet weather like it's been lately, you'll see little aphid, pods there clustered together, and they don't really hurt anything. If you want to, you can use a few different, I try not to spray my broom corn at all. In fact, most of the time I don't have any trouble with too much of anything. And if I do, I'll do it after I harvest. Because most of what's on there is not going to affect the growing or the harvesting. When I harvest the broom corn and I put it to dry, and if there's still like bugs, or sometimes you'll get something like moths, like I forget what they call them, mill moths or something like that, little tiny moths that will get into the broom corn seeds later on. And like you pick it up and these little tiny moths fly around, that's when it's time to fumigate. And what I do for that is I will take the broom corn and put it in a black trash bag, and then I'll put it out in the driveway. But before I put it out there, I'll spritz it with just a little bit of like Raid or any kind of flying insect killer, and then put it up, close it up tight, set it in the driveway, and let it bake in the sun all afternoon. And then that'll fumigate everything, kill everything off. When I do that, though, I take it right out of there, rinse it clean as best and get everything off of there, and then hang it up to dry again. And then once it's good and dry, I suggest storing it in a clear plastic tote, like the kind that you store wrapping paper in. Those flat kind of totes work really well. Anything big like that, and that way it seals it up. The other thing is these seeds are tasty. There's a lot of bugs that love these seeds, and there's a lot of mice that love these seeds, and chickens as well. So if you have chickens around, don't leave it down where the chickens are going to get to it, and make sure to just hang it up and keep it away from the mice. But broom corn will last a long time, and even if you don't use it this year, you can use it next year. It won't hurt at all to be stored. I hope that answers some of your questions there about the broom corn and growing and whatnot. But there are some good videos about broom corn production, and Farmer Teddy's getting really good at it at the folk school. He's a wealth of information. He's done it for 2 seasons now, and he's got some really nice stuff.
So there are a few questions about that. Where to order broom corn if you can't grow it yourself. And then Elizabeth Bell said she ordered some that did have bugs in the stem, tiny brown beetles. But then you have a number of other people just asking where to order it if you're a beginner.
So if you're a beginner, the place I recommend is Caddy Supply Company. It's located with a part of Pelray International, which is now part of Broom Press International. Anyway, there used to be a wonderful place called R.E. Caddy down in Greensboro. And unfortunately, Mr. Caddy, who knew my father personally, and I could drive down there and get it because it was close, they closed down a few years ago, and they sold the business to Pelray International, who are in San Antonio. But they still use the website Caddy Supply Company. And you can call up the Bart Pelton and even his son down there, and they will ship you broom corn. They can ship you small boxes, 10-pound boxes or 50-pound boxes are a good way to start. You don't have to buy a whole bale or a whole pallet full anymore. You can get it in the smaller boxes. And just tell them you want craft quality broom corn, and they'll know what to get you, the stuff with the nice long stems. And you can also order broom corn without stems called Hurl, and that's what I used to make my whisk brooms out of. And that's the dyed Hurl is what I make my witches brooms out of. And we'll show some of that as well. But yeah, Caddy Supply Company, that's the place to get it.
Great, and Kitty shared the link in the chat, so if you want to, she shared the website for Caddy Supply. So Genevieve says that she understands there's a way to fix a snapped reed when weaving the outside layer. Can you share that with us?
Oh, it happens all the time, and luckily it didn't happen on camera this time. But when it does, it's not a big deal, and especially once you're past a certain point. Now, if it just happens on the first 1 or 2 weaves, then obviously it's easier just to go back and take that broom apart, that last layer, and put in a fresh stem and try to be careful with it. If it happens when you're halfway up, then what you want to do is a splice, an overlap splice. So if it breaks right here, take it, and if it's stalk's still good. Now, sometimes there's bad stalk and you want to replace it with a new stalk, but basically you'll have to back up 2 turns to where you have the next one where you go over top of, lay the broom corn on top of each other, and then put the string right on top of both of them, and then keep weaving. Just like you would do with a basket. It's just a simple splice where you just lay it on top of each other, wrap the string on, and then at the end, you can clean it back up. But there are ways to taper it a little bit so it doesn't show, and there's all sorts of tricks to cleaning it up. Broom making is very forgiving. If you make a mistake, there's a way to fix it. And trust me, I've made every mistake possible.
Kitty, do you have some questions from the chat?
Well, yeah, I've got a couple. So, Marlow, I think you might have converted some people. We had questions about, getting the broom corn and the seeds, but someone else asked where they would find a foot winder. Well,
I have plans. I I don't mass produce them. I'm a broom maker, and I don't have a whole lot of time to do it, but I do have plans that I have on. I need to put them on my website, but I do give them out in classes. If you take a class, I have plans to make your own. But Mr. Mark Hendry, another broom maker instructor there at the folk school, he does sell some really nice wheels. And so Mark, you can definitely get a wheel from Mark that are well done with nice hardwood, but they're not hard to make. Honestly, if you needed to, you can make one out of a piece of 4x4 from the hardware store. And then if you have somebody with a lathe, they can just run a notch right in the center to wrap. And I've used that many times for many years. That works really well. But, you can do that.
That's great. We've got someone else was wanting to know, well, two questions. One, what kind of finish do you use on your handles? And then two, is it okay to use hemp twine on the broom?
Absolutely. You can use the hemp twine. In fact, I use hemp to hang up my brooms. We used to use leather cords, but the leather would, if you didn't keep it oiled, it would dry rot. So I use natural hemp cords for hanging. And the only thing is, this particular size here is about an 80-pound breaking strength. Compare that to the thin nylon, which is a 160-pound breaking strength. So this string is already twice as big in diameter, but it's half as strong. So in order to get a strong enough hemp twine, you would have to have much thicker diameter, which is not a problem. It just means that your weaving is going to be bigger. And because the hemp soaks up water as you're using it, it tends to get a little tough to weave. There are broom makers who've done it successfully. I'm not the best with weaving with the hemp, but because it's hard to tell the breaking rate. It doesn't have any stretch to it like the nylon does. But absolutely, you can do it, and it was done traditionally. You'll see several brooms that were done with hemp in the past. As far as the finish goes, I use clear furniture lacquer from Sherwin-Williams. You can, if you have a Sherwin-Williams in your neighborhood and you can get a hold of them, not every store carries it, but they can order it for you. I use what's called a moisture-resistant gloss finish. They have a semi-gloss as well, but it's a very tough lacquer. It's the kind that they use on furniture, and it was made for the furniture industry. It's made to spray on, but I brush it on, and so I can get a little thicker coat and a little more control, and I don't waste as much. If I have a whole bunch of it, for some of my really wild driftwood pieces, we would actually dip it into a bucket of lacquer and then let it drip dry, and that put on a real even coat, but it required a lot of lacquer and having it open. The thing about lacquer, though, it is it has a high VOC, a volatile organic compounds in it, so it is not the thing you want to do inside. You need to be outside with fresh air and possibly a nice mask with a carbon filter. Those tend to do the best. Well, I don't ever lacquer indoors, or else you'll be a little bit woozy, and make sure you're outside when you use it. One you can find at Lowe's and Home Depot is called Deft, D-E-F-T, and it comes in a white can with blue letter, and you can get Deft brushing lacquer, and that works just as well. But I like the Sherwin-Williams because it dries a little faster than the Deft does.
Great. Well, we do have, we might have encouraged some people to ask about a certain publication you might have appeared in your younger days. Would you be willing to share that story with our attendees today?
Well, yes. And if you look at Diane actually put it on the website, and under our publications on the website, she's outed me. It was kind of a little bonus point if somebody could find the publication. So in 1977, we had a reporter come to the house. We lived in the old Reynolds Mansion in North Asheville. It's a beautiful 3-story mansion that Dad bought, and he thought it looked like Toad Hall from Wind in the Willows. So he called it Toad Hall, and we lived there with several other folks, and it was just almost like a commune, but it was such a great story that a top aerospace engineer quit his job to go to the mountains and make brooms that the National Enquirer picked it up. And my lovely assistant here is going to bring it over. So here it is. I think Welcome Back Kotter was on the cover here. So this was actually published in 78, but the pictures were from 77. And way back here in the inside, you'll see a picture of me in overalls tying a broom at age 5. And I'll show it to you. I don't think you can see it well here, but on the website, you'll have to go and see it. But there I am with my father and my brother in overalls.
You want to bring that up? Yeah.
I'll put that up. You guys can see that. I don't know if it'll blow out or not, but that is me at 5 years old. They're little girls. I was a little cute with the toad head. That's me making brooms back in the day. But yep, the National Enquirer, it wasn't even a Bigfoot issue. So I figure if I ever made a National Enquirer at 5 years old, you know, I've got to be doing something good.
Right.
Well, thank you. That's really the perfect note to end this program on, I think. And we were here at 5 o'clock. So thank you so much. That was a wonderful demonstration. And people can find you at Biltmore. Is that right?
Yep, come to the Antler Hill Barn. If you ever come to Biltmore, come say hi at the Antler Hill Barn, right where the blacksmith shop. And I'm usually inside the barn these days. That's a good place to be.
And where can they buy your work?
So obviously, the craft shop at the folk school is probably always carries a good selection. Mary has always carried my broom since I started teaching there in the late 90s, and she has a really good selection. Also, the Folk Art Center on the Blue Ridge Parkway is a good place, but mainly our website. Now that Diana's really worked on the website, we're getting to where you can actually order and click online and customize your broom. That's one of the features she's been working on, where you can pick if you want a small, medium, large, or plain or fancy. And once you customize your broom, I send you a picture of what I have and what I've made, and then you pick the broom you like. So we're working on that so everybody gets the broom they want. But if you can't come see me in person or find a shop, come to our website. We'll find you a good broom.
Great. And our craft shop right now is available by appointment only. And I know they do have some brooms, and they might even be able to ship one. So at one point we weren't shipping brooms, but we've shipped a few. So if you're interested in one of his brooms, you can call the craft shop or make an appointment. Okay, Tammy says yes, they will ship your brooms. So good. We've got a few craft shop people on this video. So, all right, thank you so much. And our next webinar for Appalachian Traditions will be on October 19th. It will feature Helen Gibson, who is our resident artist in wood carving and a longtime Brasstown carver. She's well known for her carvings of the creche and is sought after by many collectors. So she'll be demonstrating in the on campus there and talking a little bit about her personal story and the history, and I think we'll share a link in there. And someone asked if this is being recorded. Yes, this is being recorded. You will receive a follow-up email with a link to the recording and with the all the links that we shared today. So feel free to register. I think we shared a link to register for the next program. And thank you, Marlow and Diana and Kitty.
Thank you guys for having us. We had a great time.
Thank you. Thank you. And we did also share the link to your next program, which will be on making a witch's broom. So if you'd like to hear more from Marlow, that will be October 2nd. Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Bye, guys. Thanks for coming.
Thanks.